The rain was coming down so hard, it looked like the highway had disappeared. Cole Hawthorne almost didn't stop. He almost kept driving the way he had trained himself to do for 5 years, head down, eyes forward, no detours, no complications. He had a daughter at home and a thermos of cold coffee on the seat beside him, and that was supposed to be enough. Then his headlights caught her. A woman in a tactical vest, badge still clipped to her chest, lying half off the road, with her hand pressed against her side, and the blood on the asphalt was already mixing with the rain. Cole stopped the truck. If this story already has you holding your breath, you're exactly where we want you. Subscribe to the channel right now and follow this story all the way to its end, because what happens next will shake you to your core. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. We want to see just how far the story travels. Now let's go back to that highway, because nothing that happens tonight will ever be ordinary again. The storm had been building since late afternoon, the kind that came off the Pacific, and just kept feeding itself over the Cascade foothills until it had nothing left to prove and everything left to destroy. By 11:15 at night, the highway outside Blackridge, Washington, a stretch of two-lane blacktop that connected the city's eastern edge to a cluster of rural supply depots, had turned into something close to a river. Cole Hawthorne drove it anyway. He drove it 3 or 4 nights a week, depending on the delivery schedule, because the rural contracts paid better than the daytime routes, and because driving alone at night was the only time he could think without interruption. The truck was old, the heater worked inconsistently, and the radio reception out here was mostly static. He didn't mind. Silence and routine were the two things he had built his life around since moving to Blackridge, and he had no particular desire to change either of them. He was 37 years old. He had a 10-year-old daughter named Sadie at home, currently asleep under approximately 4 blankets because she ran cold even in summer. He had a neighbor, Mrs. Dalton, who sat with Sadie on the nights Cole worked late, and who always left a pot of something on the stove for when he got back. He had a 2-bedroom house with a leaking gutter on the north side that he kept meaning to fix. He had a delivery job that paid the bills and asked nothing complicated of him. That was the life. He had chosen it deliberately, and he was not unhappy with it. He almost missed her entirely. The problem was the rain. It wasn't falling so much as detonating sheets of it, rolling across the asphalt in waves, the wipers working as fast as they could and still barely keeping up. Cole had slowed to 40, then 35, the cab of the truck filling with the sound of water hammering the roof. His headlights caught maybe 60 feet ahead before the rain swallowed them whole. The shape at the edge of the road registered as something wrong before his brain identified what it was. He hit the brakes without thinking. The truck skidded slightly on the wet road, fishtailed, and came to a stop roughly 30 yards past the shape. Cole sat there for a second, with both hands still clenched on the wheel, staring into the rearview mirror at the thing his headlights had just swept across. A person. Someone was lying at the edge of the road. He threw the truck into reverse and eased back, turning the wheel so his headlights came around and lit up the shoulder properly. She was a woman, maybe late 20s or early 30s, wearing dark tactical pants and a vest the kind law enforcement used, not military. He noted automatically with a badge clipped at the chest. She was lying on her side with her left arm stretched out on the asphalt and her right hand jammed against her ribs. The blood had spread further than it should have in the short time she'd been there, which told Cole at least 2 things immediately, and neither of them was good. He was out of the truck before he made a conscious decision to exit it. The rain hit him like a wall. Within 3 steps, his jacket was soaked through. He crossed the shoulder in a jog, dropped to one knee beside her, and put 2 fingers against the side of her neck. Pulse. Weak but consistent, slightly elevated. Her breathing was audible even over the rain shallow, catching on something, which could mean a compromised lung or just pain guarding. He couldn't tell yet. "Hey," he kept his voice level. "Can you hear me?" Her eyes opened. They were dark, and despite everything, they were focused. "Yeah," she said. The word came out rough. "Yeah, I hear you. I'm going to check your injury. Don't move. I wasn't planning on it." He pulled her hand back carefully from her ribs and got a look at the wound in the beam of his flashlight, a gunshot wound. Entrance. Left lateral torso, below the vest line. The vest had stopped 1 round. This one had found the gap. He pressed her hand back over it, then covered her hand with his. "Keep pressure," he said. "I mean it. Don't let up." I know how pressure works, she said, and there was something sharp under the pain in her voice. I've been doing this for 6 years. Doing what? Detective, she said. Blackridge PD. Cole sat back on his heels and looked at her properly in the rain. Badge on the vest, no patrol car nearby, no radio he could see. No backup of any kind. Where's your vehicle? Half a mile back. Her jaw tightened. Ran me off the road. I managed to get out and get this far before she stopped. Pressed harder against her side. My radio's in the car. Phone screen's cracked. It won't respond. Cole reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. Full signal, barely. He dialed 911 and handed it to her. Keep talking to them, he said. Don't stop. Then he stood up and walked back to the truck. In the cab behind the passenger seat, there was a military surplus medic bag that Cole had carried in every vehicle he'd owned for the past 12 years. He didn't advertise the fact. It was there because he had learned, a long time ago in circumstances very different from a rain-soaked Washington highway, that the gap between a person living and a person dying was often measured in what someone happened to have available. He grabbed the bag and a wool blanket from behind the seat and went back to her. She had the phone pressed against her ear, talking to the dispatcher in the steady, clipped manner of someone who had been trained to stay calm under pressure. Her voice was wavering at the edges but holding. Cole knelt again, unzipped the bag, and began working. "You're a first responder?" she asked, watching his hands. "No. You move like one." "I took a course," Cole said, which was technically true in the way that describing the Pacific Ocean as somewhat large was technically true. He packed the wound, applied a pressure dressing, and checked her breathing again. Still catching slightly, but stabilizing. No signs of tension pneumothorax yet. He tucked the blanket around her as best he could in the rain, raising her legs slightly to help with perfusion. She watched him through all of it with those focused dark eyes. "I'm Nora," she said finally, between instructions to the dispatcher. "Detective Nora Vásquez. Cole, just Cole for now?" She almost smiled. It looked like it hurt. The ambulance and the first patrol unit arrived 11 minutes later. Cole knew because he had been counting not from anxiety, just habit. 11 minutes was actually fast for this stretch of road in this weather, and he said so to the paramedic who stepped out of the rig first. The paramedic, a young woman with her hair pulled back and rain dripping off her jacket, glanced at what Cole had done and stopped. "Who applied this dressing?" "I did," Cole said. She crouched over Nora and examined it more carefully. "This is military-grade packing technique, like I said. I took a course." The paramedic looked at him for a moment in a way that suggested she didn't entirely believe him, but had too much to do to press it. She turned back to her patient. Cole stepped back and let them work. The patrol officer who approached him was young, maybe 25, with a face that was still putting together what had happened here. He had his notepad out and rainwater dripping from the brim of his hat, and he looked at Cole standing in the downpour holding a soaking wet surplus medic bag and said, "Sir, can I get your name and what brought you to this location tonight?" "Cole Hawthorne. I do equipment deliveries for Regency Supply. I was driving this route to a depot about 12 miles east. I saw her on the shoulder and stopped." "You stopped in this weather?" Cole looked at him. "Yeah." The officer wrote something down. "And you applied first aid?" "Yes." "Do you have medical training?" There was a brief pause, just long enough to be noticeable. "Some," Cole said. The officer wrote something else down, and Cole could tell from the way the pen moved that whatever he'd written, it wasn't some. The hospital waiting room smelled like floor cleaner and recycled air. Cole sat in a plastic chair near the window with a paper cup of terrible coffee and his still damp jacket draped over the chair back, and he tried to remember why he had agreed to come here. He hadn't, actually. The officer had asked him to follow the ambulance and provide a statement, and Cole had done it the way he did most things without overthinking it, just putting one foot in front of the other until something required him to stop. It was now past 1 in the morning. Sadie was home with Mrs. Dalton. He had texted the neighbor, who had responded with a thumbs-up emoji and nothing else, which was her way of saying everything was fine. It was fine. He just needed to finish the statement and go. A man in a shirt and tie-no jacket, like he'd come from somewhere fast, pushed through the emergency room doors at 12 minutes past 1 and went straight to the desk. Late 40s, broad, with the kind of walk that came from a long time spent being someone people made room for. He spoke to the desk nurse for 30 seconds, then turned and swept the room. His eyes landed on Cole. He crossed the room in 8 steps and stopped in front of him. "You're the one who found her," he said. Not a question. "Yes," Cole said. "Captain Dennis Farrow, Blackridge PD." He didn't extend a hand. His attention was entirely on Cole's face, the kind of assessment that took in more than surface. "The paramedic told me the packing technique on that wound was field medicine. Not civilian first aid. People learn things." "From where?" "From experience," Cole said. Farrow studied him for another moment. "Nora's going to be fine. Surgery in about an hour, but the doctor said whoever treated her in the field bought her the time she needed." He paused. "I'd like to know more about the man who did that. I'd rather not make a big thing of it. That's an interesting answer for someone who just saved a detective's life." Cole looked down at the paper cup in his hands. The coffee had gone cold. "I just stopped. Anybody would have stopped." Farrow's expression shifted slightly, not quite a frown, but something that disagreed. "You'd be surprised," he said quietly. "How many people don't?" He drove home in the rain. It was still coming down, though softer now, the storm finally losing some of its conviction. The highway looked different in the dark. On the way back, ordinary. Quiet, the shoulder clean where the ambulance had been. Cole pulled into his driveway at 2:17 in the morning. Mrs. Dalton's light was still on, which meant she was waiting up. He sat in the truck for a moment before going inside, letting the engine run. He had not thought about the shooting itself in any clinical way until now, because there had been no time for it. Now he thought about it. The entry wound angle, the vest stopping one round, and the second finding the gap that was not a robbery, not a carjacking, not a road rage incident. That was someone who knew where the vest coverage ended. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing. He turned off the engine, grabbed the medic bag from behind the seat, went inside. Sadie was asleep. He checked on her the way he always did. Door opened 2 inches, the light from the hallway falling across the floor, watching the rise and fall of the blankets until he was certain everything was as it should be. Then he closed the door quietly and went to the kitchen, where Mrs. Dalton was sitting with her own cup of tea. "Long night?" she said. "Little bit." She looked at the medic bag in his hand and then at his face, and being the woman of was-its, she said nothing further about it. "There's soup on the stove," she said. "Eat something before you sleep." "I will. Thank you, Patricia." She gathered her things and let herself out. Cole stood in the quiet kitchen for a moment, listening to the rain on the roof. He served himself a bowl of soup he barely tasted, and sat at the table alone, in the way he had been sitting at tables alone for 5 years. And he thought about the detective lying in that rain, with her hand pressed against her side, and the way she had looked at him steady, measuring, trying to assess who he was, while managing the specific and overwhelming problem of having been shot. She had known her shooter was deliberate. He had seen it in her eyes even before she confirmed anything. Cole ate the soup. He rinsed the bowl. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed and lay there in the dark for a long time, looking at the ceiling, with the feeling he had not had in 5 years, the particular awareness that something had shifted, that the ordinary life he had built so carefully around himself and his daughter was no longer quite as sealed as he had believed it to be. He told himself it was nothing. He had stopped. He had helped. It was over. He told himself that for a long time before sleep finally came. 3 days passed before Cole heard anything. He drove his routes, picked up Sadie from school, made dinner, helped with homework, and moved through the ordinary architecture of his days the way he always did deliberately, without rushing, putting attention into the small things because the small things were what the life was actually made of. Sadie was working on a project about ecosystems for her science class and had commandeered the kitchen table with construction paper and markers and a library book about Pacific Northwest forests that she kept, referencing with the gravity of a doctoral candidate. Cole sat across from her most evenings that week, drinking coffee and occasionally being asked whether salmon were more important to a forest ecosystem than he might have previously assumed. Significantly more important, he told her on Wednesday night, and she wrote that down. He didn't tell her about the highway. He didn't tell her about Detective Vásquez or the medic bag or the hospital waiting room or Captain Farrow's eyes moving across his face like a scanner looking for something it expected to find. There was no version of that conversation that didn't require explaining things Cole had spent 5 years carefully not explaining, And Sadie was 10 years old and had already lost more than any 10-year-old should have to process. He saw no reason to introduce new complications into her ecosystem project week. On Thursday morning, his phone buzzed while he was loading the truck. The number wasn't saved, but the Blackridge area code was familiar. Mr. Hawthorne, a woman's voice, controlled but with a roughness underneath it that he recognized as someone talking through residual pain. It's Nora Vásquez. Cole set down the box he was holding. Detective, how are you feeling? Like I got shot, she said. Which I did. They tell me I'm supposed to say I'm doing well, so I'm doing well. A pause. I wanted to call personally. The doctor explained what that field dressing did for me. I understand I may have significantly undersold how serious things were while you were working on me. You were managing, Cole said. That's not nothing. I was managing to bleed out with a certain amount of composure, which is maybe not the victory I thought it was at the time. She stopped. He could hear the effort behind keeping the conversations light. I wanted to thank you, properly. You don't need to. I know I don't need to. I'm doing it anyway. Another pause, longer this time. Captain Farrow wants to speak with you. In person, at the department. Nothing official, he was very specific about that, which in my experience means it is somewhat official, but he doesn't want you to bring a lawyer. Cole looked at the truck, looked at the boxes still waiting to be loaded. About what? He didn't tell me entirely, but they've been running background on the incident, and she stopped again, and this time it wasn't the pain, or not only the pain. They found some things about the shooting that are more complicated than a standard officer assault case. He thinks you might be relevant to that conversation. Why would I be relevant? There was a silence on the line that lasted just a beat too long. He'll explain it better than I can, she said. Tomorrow morning. 9 o'clock if you can manage it. Cole looked at the gray Washington sky above the depot parking lot. A single crow was sitting on the fence line 20 feet away, watching him with the specific disinterest of a creature that had seen a lot of truck drivers make phone calls and found none of them particularly compelling. I'll be there, he said. The Blackridge Police Department occupied a concrete building on the northeast side of downtown that had been built in the early 1980s and renovated once since then, in a way that suggested whoever handled the budget had prioritized function over any concern about how the walls looked. The lobby had the fluorescent hum and institutional beige of every government building Cole had ever set foot in, which was more than most people. Captain Dennis Farrow met him in the lobby at 9:02 and walked him back through a maze of corridors to a conference room that smelled like old coffee and dry erase marker. The room had a long table, 8 chairs, a whiteboard with something half erased on it, and 2 other people already seated: a woman in a dark blazer, who Farrow introduced as Special Investigator Teresa Cho from the State Attorney General's office, and a man in a rumpled sport coat named Detective Sergeant Paul Arkin, who worked major crimes out of the Blackridge Department, and who looked at Cole when he walked in with the kind of flat, measuring attention that had nothing performative about it. Farrow sat down across from Cole and folded his hands on the table. Mr. Hawthorne, he said, I appreciate you coming in. Before we get into this, I want to be clear you're not here under any kind of compulsion. You can leave at any point. Is that understood? Yes, Cole said. Good. Farrow glanced at the woman from the AG's office, then back. We ran a background check on you as part of standard incident documentation, which you probably expected. I did. What came back was more than we expected. Farrow's voice stayed even. 7 years Navy service, multiple deployments, advanced tactical medicine training, classification levels that required us to make some calls to confirm what we were actually looking at. He let that sit for a moment. You've been in Blackridge for 5 years, delivering equipment for Ridgeline Supply. That's correct. No incidents, no complaints, no record of any kind. Arkin spoke for the first time. His voice was flat, like someone who had decided a long time ago that inflection was extra work. You just stopped doing what you were trained to do and started driving a truck. People change careers, Cole said. Sure. Arkin looked at his notepad. Your wife, Lauren Hawthorne née Carrasco, died 5 years ago. Traffic incident initially ruled accidental, later reclassified as a suspicious death. Case went cold after 14 months. Cole kept his expression still. He had had a lot of practice keeping his expression still. That's accurate. The investigation into her death was handled out of the Hawthorne County Sheriff's Office, Cho said. She had a careful, precise way of speaking, like someone who measured words before spending them. It stalled primarily because two of the responding deputies later resigned under circumstances that were never fully explained, and certain evidence logs from that period have gaps. Cole looked at her. "You're telling me things I know." "We're telling you things that have become newly relevant," she said, because of what Detective Vásquez was working on when she was shot. The room was quiet for a moment. Outside in the corridor, someone's radio crackled and then went silent. "She was undercover," Farrow said. "Not formally, it wasn't a sanctioned operation at the department level, which is its own problem we're dealing with separately. She'd been developing a source inside a freight logistics company called Meridian Transport. Regional operation, about 300 employees, handles cargo distribution through about a dozen states. On the surface, unremarkable." He paused. "Underneath it, our working theory is that it's been functioning as a distribution network for an organized criminal enterprise operating in the Pacific Northwest for somewhere between 8 and 12 years. Cole said nothing. "The enterprise moves money primarily. Financial fraud, corporate infiltration, bribery of public officials. There are connected threads to at least 2 unsolved deaths that we've identified so far." Farrow looked at him steadily. "Your wife's death may be a third." The fluorescent lights hummed. The dry erase ghost on the whiteboard read something about timeline and confirmed dates in letters that had been almost but not entirely wiped away. "The deputies who resigned from Hawthorne County," Cole said. "Do you have names?" "We do," Cho said. "One of them has since died. Natural causes, we believe, though the timeline is interesting. The other one relocated to Eastern Oregon and has been uncontactable for the past 18 months. "What connected her to Meridian Transport?" Cole asked. "My wife." Farrow looked at the folder in front of him. "She pulled over a Meridian vehicle for a broken taillight on the county road near your property. She wasn't law enforcement. She didn't pull anyone over. I should be clearer. She stopped to help. She was a nurse. She saw a vehicle stopped on the shoulder and stopped to see if anyone needed assistance. The driver of the vehicle was transporting documents that, based on what we now know, would have been significant to an investigation." He paused. "She apparently saw something she shouldn't have. The words landed the way words like that always landed, not like a blow, more like the floor developing a soft spot directly under where you were standing." Cole had known, in a general and terrible way, that Lauren's death was not what it had been initially presented as. The reclassification to suspicious, the stalled investigation, the deputies who disappeared quietly, he had known that the official story had holes in it large enough to drive through. He had filed that knowledge away in a place he did not visit, because visiting it while raising a 7-year-old alone was not compatible with getting through the day. "Why are you telling me this now?" His voice came out steady. He was mildly surprised by that. "Because Nora Vásquez was shot by someone who knew her route," Cho said. She had not told the department she was meeting her source that night. She told 2 people her source, who we believe is compromised but not the shooter, and one person she trusts personally who is not a law enforcement officer. Cho paused. The intelligence leak that led to her shooting came from inside the department. "We have a problem," Farrow said quietly, "and it's not a small one." Cole looked at the table for a moment, then back up at Farrow. "What exactly do you want from me?" "Nothing yet," Farrow said. "Honestly, right now I want you to know what you walked into when you stopped on that highway. Because I think you have a right to know. And because he stopped," chose his next words carefully, "because the man who trained the way your records say you trained, and who then spent 5 years delivering equipment and packing his kids' school lunches, is someone who made a decision. And I respect that decision. I'm not here to drag you out of it." "But," Cole said. Farrow met his eyes. "But Nora Vásquez nearly died because someone inside this department fed information to people connected to an organization that we now believe was also connected to your wife's death. And I am." He stopped again, and something real moved across his face briefly. "I am running out of people I know with certainty that I can trust." Cole drove to Sadie's school pickup that afternoon and sat in the parking lot line like every other parent, in a truck that smelled like cardboard and rain-damp upholstery, and thought about what it meant that the 2 worst things that had ever happened to his life might turn out to be the same thing. Sadie came through the school doors at 3:17 in a bright yellow rain jacket, backpack over both shoulders, talking to a friend beside her with the animated intensity she brought to most conversations. She spotted the truck, said something that made her friend laugh, and jogged over. She climbed in and immediately said, "We got our ecosystem projects graded." "How'd you do? A minus." She buckled her seatbelt. Mrs. Corrigan said, "I went too deep on the salmon tree nitrogen cycle, and not enough on biodiversity, which I disagree with, but whatever." "You got an A minus. It should have been an A. The salmon section was excellent." Cole looked at her, the 10-year-old certainty of it, the complete absence of self-doubt on the one thing she had clearly cared most about, and felt something in his chest pull tight. "Your salmon section was excellent," he agreed. She settled back in the seat, satisfied. "How was your day?" "Fine," he said. "Quiet." He went to see Nora Vásquez at the hospital on Friday afternoon. She was in a private room on the 3rd floor, sitting up in the bed with a laptop open on a rolling table in front of her, reading something with the focused expression of a person who had decided that recovering from surgery was not a sufficient reason to stop working. She looked up when Cole knocked on the open door and closed the laptop with the reflexive caution of someone used to keeping screens private. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know." He came in, took the chair near the window. "How are you actually feeling?" "Better than yesterday." "Yesterday was bad." She said it without drama. They got the bullet. There was some damage to muscle tissue and a cracked rib. The rib is the part that's making breathing interesting. She shifted slightly, and the care with which she moved told him more about how much it still hurt than anything she said. "Pharaoh told me he met with you." "He did." "He told you about Meridian." "He did." She looked at him steadily. Her eyes in the daylight were a dark brown, very direct, with fine lines at the corners from squinting into what he guessed was a lot of courtroom lighting and field surveillance. "How are you handling that?" "The information about Lauren." The use of his wife's name, just casually, without apology or preamble, landed strangely not badly, just strangely. As though it was a word people around him almost never used, which was true, because mostly they went around it, referring to what happened, or the accident, or the careful non-phrase of your loss, as if the actual name might set something off. "I'm handling it," he said. "That's not really an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She didn't push it. He found he appreciated that. She folded her hands over the blanket and looked out the window. For a moment the view was of a parking structure and a strip of gray sky, not particularly inspiring, but she seemed to find it useful to look at something that wasn't him. "My source at Meridian is a man named Eddie Trask," she said. "Dispatcher. Been there 9 years. He came to me 8 months ago because he started noticing shipment irregularities, cargo weights that didn't match manifests, routes that made no logistical sense, financial transfers attached to deliveries that didn't exist in any physical record." She paused. "He's not a particularly brave person. He's got a wife and 2 kids and a mortgage, and he came to me because he was scared and didn't know what else to do. Now he's terrified, because whoever arranged what happened to me almost certainly knows he's been talking. Is he protected? Inadequately." The word came out flat and hard. "Which is the other thing keeping me up at night. Pharaoh's got a unit watching his house, but if someone inside the department arranged my shooting..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Cole looked at her. The hospital room was quiet, the monitor beside the bed, tracking a steady green line, the afternoon light coming through the window at an angle that made the whole room look slightly washed out. "What was the evidence you were going to give the investigator?" he asked. "The night you were shot." She was quiet for a moment. Then she reached into the drawer of the bedside table and took out a USB drive, small, matte black, the kind that looked entirely unremarkable. She held it in her palm. "Copies," she said. "Eddie made copies of the internal transfer records, the false manifests, and 3 years of routing logs that show systematic use of the Meridian network for non-freight purposes." She turned it over in her fingers. "The original documents are in a location that only Eddie knows. I had the copies on me the night of the shooting, in my jacket pocket. And they didn't find them. They didn't check the jacket." Something crossed her face, not quite satisfaction, more the dark humor of someone who had survived something partially by luck and knew it. "They thought I was carrying a file folder. They were looking for paper. Eddie's paranoid about digital security. Everything he gave me was paper copies, and I photographed and transferred everything before I left the office that night." She closed her fingers around the drive. But paper burns, these don't. Cole was quiet for a moment, thinking. Nora, he said. Who knew you were meeting the investigator that night? She looked at him. Farrow said you told 2 people. Your source and one other person. She held his gaze.
Yes.
And Trask is compromised, but probably not the shooter. That's our working assessment. Which means the second person you told is someone I have worked with for 6 years, she said. The sentence came out quiet and very controlled. Someone I trusted completely. And I cannot make myself believe it. But I also can't explain the alternative. Cole said nothing. There was nothing to say to that particular kind of loss. He knew, in a different way, what it felt like to discover that the architecture of something you had trusted completely had been built on ground that couldn't hold it. He sat with her for another 20 minutes. They didn't talk about the investigation. She asked him about Sadie not intrusively, just the way people do when they want to talk about something real for a while, and he told her about the A- Salmon Ecosystem Project, and Nora Vásquez laughed, carefully, in a way that suggested laughing pulled at her rib, and then said, She's right, though. The salmon section sounds excellent. He drove home through the Friday afternoon. Traffic, feeling the specific weight of something that was not yet a decision, exactly, but was beginning to have the shape of one. The break-in happened Saturday night. Cole was at home. He got the call from Farrow at 11:43, which was late enough that his first thought was Sadie, and the second it took his sleeping brain to register the name Farrow rather than the school or a neighbor was one of the longer seconds he could remember. Someone accessed Nora's department locker and her off-site evidence storage unit sometime between 8 and 10 tonight, Farrow said. His voice had the controlled flatness of a man who was furious and managing it. Took everything except one sealed evidence envelope that had been misfiled in the wrong unit. Everything else gone. What was in the misfilled envelope? Cole asked. Farrow was quiet for a beat. A photograph. Standard surveillance photo, time-stamped 4 years ago outside a Meridian transport facility in Coverton County. He paused. There's a woman in the photograph. In the background, partially obscured. Our photo analyst thinks she was there by coincidence, just driving past. Cole was sitting on the edge of his bed in the dark. The house was quiet. He could hear the faint sound of rain starting again outside. Farrow, he said. Who is she? Another pause, longer. Based on the vehicle registration in the same frame, Farrow said, We believe it's Lauren Hawthorne. The rain picked up outside, tapping at the window in the uneven way of rain that hasn't yet decided how serious it wants to be. She drove past a Meridian facility, Cole said. 4 months before she died, Farrow said. At a time when, based on what we're building, the network was actively monitoring anyone who came within a certain proximity of their operations. He stopped. Cole, I need you to understand what I'm telling you. I understand what you're telling me. She wasn't targeted randomly, Farrow said. She was on a list. She was being watched. And when she stopped to help a driver on the road that night, she'd already been flagged, Cole said. Farrow didn't answer. He didn't need to. The photograph was still in the envelope. Everything else was gone. Cole turned that over in his mind, the deliberateness of it, the message built into the selective theft. They had taken everything useful and left one thing behind. Not by accident, as something closer to communication. I need to see it, Cole said. I know, Farrow said. I was going to ask. He drove to the department at midnight. The photograph was 8 by 10, black and white, taken from an elevated position, probably a fixed camera at the facility entrance. The Meridian building was in the left third of the frame, industrial and unremarkable, with a chain-link fence and a guard booth. In the center lane of the road running past it, a light-colored sedan was caught mid-motion, and through the driver's side window, partially obscured by the angle and the glass, was a face. Cole had looked at that face every day for 5 years in various photographs around his house. He would have known it in a fraction of a second, from twice the distance. He set the photograph down on the table, put both hands flat on the surface. Breathed. Arkin was in the corner of the room, not speaking, giving Cole the space to look. Farrow was standing near the door. Cho had been called in and was sitting at the end of the table with a legal pad and a pen she hadn't used yet. She didn't know, Cole said. She had no idea what that building was. We believe that's correct, Cho said. She drove a familiar route to a clinic where she sometimes covered shifts. The Meridian facility sits just off that road. She had no reason to avoid it. No reason to know it was anything other than a freight company. Cole looked at the photograph for another long moment. Lauren in mid-motion. Lauren not knowing. Lauren already, 4 months before she died, somewhere inside a machinery she was completely invisible to, and visible to at the same time. The envelope, he said. It was misfilled, yes, Pharaoh said. Someone took everything except one thing. And the one thing they left is this. Yes. That's not carelessness, Cole said. They knew what was in there. They left it deliberately. The room was quiet. That means they know who she was, Cole said. To me. They left her here because they wanted you or me to find her. They're telling you they have more. That they know more. He looked up at Pharaoh. It's leverage. They're showing you what they're capable of accessing, and they're showing you that they have a personal hook to put in me if they need one. Pharaoh held his gaze. That's exactly what Cho and I concluded 40 minutes ago. Cole straightened. He picked up the photograph and held it for a moment before setting it back down carefully on the table. He looked at it the way someone looks at a thing they want to memorize, Mythor, before it gets taken from them again. Then he looked at Pharaoh. Tell me what you actually need, he said. Not the careful version, the real one. Pharaoh and Cho exchanged a look. Arkin in the corner shifted his weight. We need someone outside the department, Pharaoh said. Someone who can assess Nora's security situation, look at the threat environment, and help us identify who inside the organization is feeding information out. We can't use department personnel we don't know the perimeter of the compromise. We can't bring in the AG's office formally without alerting people we don't want alerted. And he stopped, looked at the table for a moment, then back up. We are genuinely running short on options, Cole. Cole was quiet. My daughter is 10 years old, he said. Not an argument, just a fact that needed to be in the room. I know, Pharaoh said. She's already lost one parent. I know that too. The rain outside had made up its mind and was coming down hard now, hammering the station roof with a sound that filled the pauses in the conversation. Cole looked at the photograph one more time. Then he said, I'm not going back to what I was. That's a condition, not a negotiating point. Understood, Pharaoh said. I'll advise. I'll assess. I'll tell you where the vulnerabilities are and what the threat picture looks like. That's the boundary. That's all we're asking. Cole nodded once. Looked at Cho, then at Arkin, then back at Pharaoh. Then let's start, he said, by talking about who Nora told that night. Because that's where your problem begins. The person Nora had told was a detective named Ray Caulfield. Cole learned this sitting at Pharaoh's conference table at 12:40 in the morning with a paper cup of bad coffee going cold in front of him, while Pharaoh walked him through the structure of Nora's unit and the specific chain of events from the night she was shot. Caulfield was 44, 16 years on the force, 9 of them in the Major Crimes Division. He had a commendation from the city council, a reputation for closing difficult cases, and a divorce that had been finalized 8 months ago. He was also, according to Pharaoh, the person Nora trusted most inside the department, the colleague she had worked beside, through 2 major investigations. The one she called when something didn't sit right. The one who had covered for her when the informal surveillance on Meridian started taking more of her time than her official caseload allowed. She told him where she was going that night, Pharaoh said. Not the full picture. She said she was meeting a source, didn't give the name or the location explicitly. But she told him the general area and the approximate time, because that's what they did for each other. Safety protocol. In case something went wrong. Something went wrong, Cole said. Yes. Has he been told he's a person of interest? No. Pharaoh's jaw was tight, because if he's compromised, telling him changes his behavior in ways that could get people killed. And if he's not compromised, if there's another explanation, then I've just destroyed a 16-year career and a friendship on incomplete information. Cole looked at the table. What's the other explanation? That his phone was being monitored, Cho said from the end of the table. Or that someone in his proximity accessed his communications without his knowledge. We're not in a position to rule that out. Has he been behaving differently since the shooting? Arkin answered that one. Normal amount of concern. Visited the hospital twice, asking about the investigation in ways that read as standard colleague behavior. Not overcorrecting, not going quiet. He paused, which could mean he's innocent or that he's good. Cole thought about it. What does Nora think? The room got slightly quieter in a particular way. "We haven't told Nora that Caulfield is under scrutiny," Farrow said. "She's going to figure it out," Cole said. "She's in a hospital bed running the investigation from a laptop. She's going to count backward and land on the same name you landed on." "I know," Farrow said, "which is part of why I wanted to move quickly." Cole leaned back in the chair. Outside the station, the rain was still going, and somewhere down the corridor a phone rang 3 times and then went to voicemail. He was aware, in the specific way of a man who had spent years listening to the texture of rooms, that the 3 people across from him were holding their professional futures in a fairly precarious position right now, running an off-books assessment of their own department, in the middle of the night, with a civilian they had met 4 days ago because he happened to stop on a highway. It was not a situation any of them would have chosen. "Walk me through Nora's security situation right now," Cole said. "Physical access to her room, who knows she still has the drive, and what your threat assessment is for the next 72 hours. Farrow and Arkin exchanged a look, and then they walked him through it. It took 40 minutes. Cole asked questions and did not write anything down, because he had stopped writing things down years ago and simply remembered them, which was a habit that had occasionally unnerved people who expected notes. By the time they finished, it was past 1:30 in the morning, and Cole had a clear enough picture to work with. The picture was not good. Nora was in a semi-private hospital with standard visitor protocols and 1 uniformed officer on rotating 8-hour shifts outside her door. The drive was still in her bedside drawer. 3 people inside the department knew the drive existed: Farrow, Arkin, and Caulfield, who had been briefed during the initial investigation response. The AG's investigator that Nora had been traveling to meet was a man named Delworth, who was currently sitting on the evidence copies and waiting for direction. And Eddie Trask, the Meridian dispatcher, who had started all of this, was in his house in a neighborhood on the south side of Blackridge, with a patrol car parked out front driven by officers whose loyalty was unknown. "Trask is the weakest point," Cole said. "If the network knows Nora is still alive and still has what she has, they're going to move on Trask before they try anything else. He's the source of the originals. Burning him resolves the underlying problem, regardless of what happens to the copies." "We have a unit on the house," Arkin said. "You have a patrol car on the street," Cole said, "from a department that has a compromised officer somewhere inside it. That's not the same thing." Arkin looked at him for a moment. "Didn't argue. He needs to move," Cole said. "Tonight, ideally. Tomorrow morning at the latest. Somewhere that isn't in any database connected to the department." "He has a wife and kids," Farrow said. "I know. They all need to move." Cole looked at Farrow steadily. "Do you have someone outside the department you trust to move them?" Farrow thought for a moment. "My sister-in-law has a property in Yakima. Off the grid, practically speaking, it's a family property. Not in my name. Not in any record connected to the department." "Can you make that call tonight? It's 2 in the morning." "Yes," Cole said. Farrow looked at him for a long second, then picked up his phone. Cole got home at 3:15. He stood in the kitchen for a few minutes, not doing anything in particular, just letting his eyes adjust to the dark and his brain decompress from the particular kind of concentrated focus that left a residue. Then he went and checked on Sadie. She was asleep on her side facing the window, the blankets pulled up around her ears in the characteristic formation she'd slept in since she was 4, completely burrowed, only the top of her head visible. He stood in the doorway for what was probably too long and looked at her breathing. Then he went to his own room, sat on the edge of the bed, and thought about what he had just agreed to. He had been very clear with Farrow. Advise and assess. Identify vulnerabilities. Keep Nora alive. He was not re-entering the life he had left. He was not picking up a weapon. He was not walking back into the version of himself that had spent 7 years learning how to operate in situations where everything had gone wrong and the objective was still the objective. That version of him was retired, and he intended to keep it that way. He believed what he said when he said it. He also knew, lying back on the bed and staring at the ceiling, that the moment he had seen Lauren's face in that photograph, the version of this situation he was willing to accept had shifted in ways he hadn't fully processed yet. The careful distinction between advising and acting, between standing outside a burning building and calling instructions through a window versus walking in, was a distinction that made complete sense right now, at 3 in the morning with Sadie asleep down the hall. He wasn't sure how much sense it would make if things continued to move the way they were moving. He slept 4 hours. He woke up when Sadie's alarm went off at 7, and by the time she padded into the kitchen in her socks he had coffee made and her lunch half assembled. "You look tired," she said, climbing onto her stool at the counter. "I had a late work night." She regarded him with the unsentimental assessment of a child who has learned to read her parents' face for information. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Bug." She held his gaze for another beat, decided to accept the answer for now, and reached for her juice. "Can we make pancakes Saturday?" "We can make pancakes Saturday." "Good," she said, and opened her library book. He called Pharaoh at 8:30 from his truck, parked outside the Ridgeline Depot before his shift started. "Trask move happen?" he asked. "They left at 4 this morning," Pharaoh said. He sounded like someone who had also slept 4 hours, or possibly fewer. "Wife wasn't happy. Kids were confused. Eddie was a mess, frankly. But they went." A pause. "My sister-in-law was surprisingly calm about the whole thing." "Good people are often calmer than you expect. She made everyone eggs when they arrived, apparently." Pharaoh's voice had something dry in it that might have been the edge of a laugh under the exhaustion. "I need to see this afternoon. Cho's been working all night, and she found something in Meridian's financial records that we need your read on. I'll be at the depot until 2. 3 o'clock, my office." Cole put the phone in his pocket, got out of the truck, and went to work. The financial records Cho had pulled were a dense and intricate piece of construction that took Cole about 30 minutes to read carefully and another 20 to fully appreciate. She had them spread across Pharaoh's conference table in a sequence that showed, layer by layer, how Meridian Transport's billing system had been used as a pipeline for transferring funds between shell companies, not large individual transfers, which would have triggered automated flags, but hundreds of small ones, distributed across dozens of accounts, timed to coincide with legitimate freight billing cycles, so they absorbed into the normal financial noise of a mid-sized logistics operation. "The pattern goes back 11 years, Cho said. She had the slightly wired look of someone running on caffeine and momentum. "And it doesn't originate with Meridian. Meridian is a node. The original flow comes from a parent entity that we've traced through 4 layers of corporate registration to a holding company incorporated in Nevada called Vantage Group Services." "Vantage Group," Cole said. "It has no public profile. It owns pieces of 12 different companies in 7 states: logistics, real estate, a staffing agency, 2 private security contractors. All legitimate on the surface. Meridian is the one we happened to find because Eddie Trask happened to get scared." She paused. "The total flow through the network, as best we can calculate, is somewhere between $40 and $60 million over 11 years. Cole looked at the records for a moment. "The private security contractors. Do you have names?" Cho slid a page across the table. He read the 2 names, Halcyon Protective Services and Ridgeback Security Group, and put them in the back of his mind where things waited to become useful. "The compromised deputies in Coverton County," he said. "Their names, have you run them against any of Vantage Group's subsidiary payrolls?" Cho looked at him, then at Pharaoh. "No," she said. "Not yet." "Do that," Cole said. "Because if the network has been running for 11 years, and they've been protecting their operational perimeter, compromising local officials, deputies, inspectors, billing regulators, whoever they need, then the payments have to go somewhere. They're not paying people in cash. It's not efficient at scale." Cho was already writing. "The photograph," Cole said. "Lauren was photographed near a Meridian facility 4 months before she died. She died after stopping to help a driver during what was reported as a routine roadside incident. Was the driver of that vehicle ever identified?" Arkin, who had been sitting in the corner again in his customary silence, shifted his weight. "The original incident report listed the vehicle as an unregistered white panel van. No plates captured. Driver fled before county units arrived." He paused. "The 2 deputies who took the original call were the same 2 who resigned." Cole was quiet for a moment. "The van," he said. "White panel van, unregistered, in Coverton County, roughly 5 years ago. Has anyone cross-referenced that vehicle description against Meridian's fleet?" The silence that followed that question was the specific kind that meant nobody had. "They used their own vehicles," Cole said. Not accusing, just thinking aloud. "The network has a freight logistics operation. They move things. when they needed to move something that night or someone they used a company vehicle. And the company vehicle is in their own records. Cho was on her laptop before he finished the sentence. He visited Nora again that evening. She had been moved to a different room Pharaoh's call after Cole had flagged that her original room's location relative to the staff elevator was less than ideal, and she was sitting up looking considerably more alert than 2 days ago, though the laptop was open and she had clearly been working for most of the day. "You got Eddie moved," she said when Cole came in. "Pharaoh made the call," Cole said. "Based on your read." She looked at him. "He told me. He also told me you figured out in about 3 hours what our threat assessment team spent 4 days not figuring out." She paused. "That's not a criticism of you. I know. It's a criticism of the situation." She set the laptop aside. "Cole, what did you used to do? Actually, before Blackridge and the delivery truck." He sat down in the chair by the window. The evening light was doing something orange and complicated through the Venetian blinds, laying strips of gold across the floor. "I was a Navy SEAL," he said. "Combat medicine specialist. 7 deployments." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. Not surprised, exactly, or rather surprised, in the way of someone who had already suspected and was now simply receiving confirmation. "I left when Lauren died," he said. "I had a 5-year-old. There was nobody else. Did leaving help?" It was the most direct question anyone had asked him about it in 5 years. Most people went around it carefully, the way you go around a piece of furniture you've learned to navigate in the dark. "Leaving helped, Sadie," he said. "Whether it helped me is a different question with a more complicated answer." Nora nodded slowly. She wasn't pushing it, just receiving it. "Ray Caulfield came to see me this afternoon," she said. Cole kept his face still. "How was that? Normal?" "The way it always is." She looked at her hands for a moment. "He brought terrible coffee from the vending machine on the 2nd floor, which is the coffee he always brings because he finds it funny that it's so bad. And we talked about the case in the way we always talk about cases, and he sat in that chair for 40 minutes and was exactly the same as he always is." She stopped. "And I sat there trying to find one thing, one tell, one moment where something didn't add up and I couldn't find it." She looked up, which either means he's innocent or I've spent 6 years working beside someone I never actually knew. And I don't know which of those is worse. "Have you talked to Pharaoh about him?" "This afternoon. He told me what he told you." She shook her head slightly. "I'm trying to hold both possibilities at once. It's making me very tired." "The phone monitoring theory is legitimate," Cole said. "If someone had access to his communications," "I know," she said. "I've been running that scenario all day. It's possible. It requires access to his department-issued phone, which requires either physical access or someone inside the IT infrastructure." She paused. "Which brings us back to the perimeter problem. We don't know how far in the compromise goes." Cole looked at her. She was pale from the surgery, and the pain, and the effort of thinking through this much for this many consecutive hours. And there was a tightness around her eyes that went beyond physical discomfort. She was carrying the specific weight of someone who had nearly died for something, and was now not certain. The ground beneath the mission was what she had believed it to be. "The records Cho pulled today," he said. "There are vehicle manifests in Meridian's system from 5 years ago that we haven't cross-referenced yet. If the van that night was a Meridian vehicle, it puts Meridian directly in Lauren's death," Nora said.
Not adjacent to it.
"Directly, yes." She held his gaze. "How are you sitting in this room having this conversation without? I mean, how are you—" "Because I've had 5 years to understand that Lauren is gone," Cole said quietly. "And what I'm doing right now is the first thing that has felt like it's actually moving towards something." He paused. "Getting angry doesn't move it. I know that. I've tried anger. It doesn't move anything." Nora looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Okay, tell me what you need from me." What he needed from her, it turned out, was access to everything she had on the internal structure of the investigation, every communication she had sent or received through department channels over the past 8 months, every log entry, every piece of procedural documentation. Not because he expected to find something Cho hadn't found, but because he wanted to map the information flow. Who had known what and when, and who had been adjacent to each decision point. She gave him everything. It took 2 days to read properly. On the 3rd day, Cole called Pharaoh. "The leak isn't Caulfield," he said. Pharaoh was quiet for a second. "You're sure?" Caulfield is visible in the communication logs at every point where information was passed to him. The timing works against him, being the source, the sequence in which things were acted on externally, is inconsistent with him having the information first. Cole was in his truck in the Ridgeline Depot parking lot, the engine running for heat. The person who knew Nora's route that night, the specific route, the specific window, had access to information that Caulfield never had. Nora told Caulfield she was meeting a source in the General East Highway area. That's not enough to set up what happened to her. Someone needed a tighter picture. Then someone who had access to the department's vehicle tracking system, Cole said. Nora took a department vehicle that night, signed it out at 8:47 p.m. The vehicle has a GPS unit on its standard fleet tracking. Someone who could see the live tracking feed would have had her precise location in real time. Another silence. Longer. That's a very small number of people, Farrow said. It is, Cole said. Who manages fleet access and tracking? He heard Farrow breathing on the other end of the line. Transport and logistics, Farrow said slowly. Which reports he stopped. Deputy Chief Harold Mears. Cole said nothing. Mears has been with the department for 22 years, Farrow said. The words came out like someone reciting them against their will. I know, Cole said. I'm not saying he's the one who had access. I'm saying someone with access to that system watched Nora's vehicle that night and made a phone call. You need to pull the access logs for the fleet tracking system going back to the night she was shot. Who logged in? From what terminal? At what time? He could hear Farrow processing it on the other end of the line. The silence had a quality to it that Cole had come to recognize the silence of someone reorganizing a picture they had been looking at for a long time. I'll need to go outside the department for the pull, Farrow said. If I request it internally, go through Cho, Cole said. She has the authority and the channel. Right. A pause. Cole. Yeah, if this goes where it looks like it might go. Farrow stopped. Started again. The people who ran the asset tracking on Nora's vehicle and then watched her get shot are connected to the same organization that we believe was connected to Lauren's death. If we're right about all of this. I know, Cole said. How are you? I'm doing my job, Cole said, which right now is this. Let me know what the access logs show. He ended the call and sat in the truck with the engine running and the depot sounds around him, forklifts and loading bay doors, and the ordinary mechanical noise of a place moving things from one point to another. He sat there for a few minutes doing nothing in particular. Then he drove his route. The access logs took Cho 3 days to obtain through the appropriate state channels and another day to parse. What they showed was that on the night of Nora's shooting, the Blackridge PD fleet tracking system had been accessed from a terminal in the records management office at 9:18 p.m. after hours by a login credential belonging to a records clerk named Seal Bannerman, who had been on approved family leave for 2 weeks and had not been in the building. The credential had been used by someone who knew the login and had physical access to the building and that specific terminal. The records management office was in a section of the building accessible without a visitor badge to anyone with a department-issued keycard. 11 people had department-issued keycards with access to that corridor. Farrow, Arkin, Caulfield, and Mears were among them. But the terminal's access had a second layer, a separate authentication code that records management used for sensitive file access. That code rotated monthly and was distributed only to records staff and department administration. It was not something a patrol officer or even a standard detective would have. Administration meant 4 people. Mears was one of them. Cole got the report from Cho on a Tuesday afternoon and read it in his truck outside Sadie's school, waiting for pickup. He read it twice. Then he put his phone in his jacket pocket and watched the school doors. Sadie came out at 3:17 in the yellow rain jacket. He watched her say goodbye to her friend. He watched her spot the truck. He watched her jog over with the backpack bouncing, and he watched her face through the windshield open, ordinary, occupied with whatever the last hour of the school day had been. She climbed in, buckled up, said, "Can we stop at the grocery store? We're out of orange juice." "Sure," Cole said. "Also, I think Mrs. Dalton ate the last of the yogurt, but I'm not totally sure. I'll check when we get home." She looked at him. The unsentimental assessment, the reading of his face. "You okay?" "Yeah," he said. "I'm okay." He pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward the grocery store, and he thought about Deputy Chief Harold Mears, 22 years on the force, and about a white panel van on a county road 5 years ago, and about the particular human capacity for moving through the world looking like something you are not. He called Farrow that evening after Sadie was in bed. "Mears," Cole said. "I know," Farrow said. His voice was the flattest Cole had heard it. "You've looked at his financials?" "Cho is looking. We needed a judge. We got one this afternoon." A pause. "He's been on the force for 22 years. He's been to my house for dinner. He helped me move a refrigerator 3 years ago." Cole said nothing. He understood the specific uselessness of that kind of history in the face of what the logs showed. He understood it in the way of someone who had learned, gradually and unwillingly, that the people who do the worsts are almost never strangers. "We can't move on him directly," Farrow said. "Not yet. If he gets spooked, if he knows we're looking, he'll shut down any communication with the network, and we lose the thread back to Vantage Group and everyone above Meridian." "Agreed," Cole said. "You need him to act. You need to give him something to act on." The pause on the line was the sound of Farrow arriving at the same place Cole had already been for the past hour.
You're talking about drawing him out,
Farrow said. "I'm talking about giving the network something to move on. Something that looks like the last piece they need to clean this up, and then watching who moves and where they go." "A trap," Farrow said. "A trap," Cole said. "And you have something in mind." Cole leaned back against the kitchen counter in the quiet of his house, with Sadie asleep down the hall and the last of the evening's rain tapping at the window. "Nora still has the drive," he said. "Everyone who matters knows it. What they don't know is where the original documents are, the paper copies Eddie photographed, the source material that would stand up in federal court without question." He paused. "We put out the information, carefully, through channels that Mears can access, that Nora has arranged to personally transport the originals to the federal building in Seattle this Friday. Physical documents in her possession in a vehicle on a specific route. She's not cleared for transport. She just had surgery." "They don't know that," Cole said. "They know she's alive. They know she's stubborn. They know she was shot once and kept doing the job. Nora arranging an early transport is exactly what she would do, and the people watching this situation know it." Farrow was quiet for a long moment. "And we'll be ready." "I'll make sure we're ready," Cole said. "That's my part of it." Another pause. "Nora has to agree," Farrow said. "I'll talk to her tomorrow," Cole said. "She'll agree." He was right about that. He knew it before he made the call, because he had spent enough time in Nora Vásquez's hospital room to understand what moved her, and what moved her was not caution, or comfort, or self-preservation. What moved her was the specific and stubborn need to finish what she started. She had started something 8 months ago, when Eddie Trask walked into a coffee shop in the south side of Blackridge and told her things that frightened him, and she was not going to stop because she had been shot. He knew that about her, the way he knew certain things not from being told, but from watching someone operate under pressure and seeing what held. He ended the call, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. He didn't sleep well. He didn't expect to. The plan was sound, and the logic was clean, and the pieces fit together the way pieces did when you had enough information and enough time to arrange them properly. He knew all of that, and he also knew that plans were the things you made before contact, and contact changed every plan in ways you couldn't anticipate until you were in it. He was staying outside it. He was advising. He had said so, and he meant it. He lay in the dark and listened to his house settle around him, and told himself that right up until the moment he fell asleep. Nora agreed to the plan on Wednesday morning without hesitation, which was exactly what Cole had expected, and which did not make him feel better about it. She was sitting up in the hospital bed when he arrived, the laptop already open, a half-eaten piece of toast on the rolling table beside her that suggested she had been up working before breakfast arrived, rather than the other way around. She listened to the full outline without interrupting the false transport itinerary, the information channel through Mears, the coordination with Cho's office, and the state AG team, who would be positioned along the route. When Cole finished, she was quiet for about 4 seconds. "Friday," she said. "Friday gives us 2 days to seed the information correctly, and enough time for it to move through Mears to whoever he's reporting to." "What's the vehicle?" "Unmarked department sedan, real vehicle, real plates. Driver will be Arkin, he's clean. Farrow is certain of it, and he reads as standard transport to anyone watching." "Am I actually in the vehicle?" "No," Cole said. "You're here. The network will be told you're in the vehicle." The distinction matters. She looked at him. They'll have people on the route. That's the objective, Cole said. When they move on the vehicle, we identify them, we track them back, and we close the loop on the network's operational personnel in Blackridge. Cho's team handles the arrests. Pharaoh's people, the ones he's certain of, handle containment. And Mears? Mears gets picked up the moment the network activates. His communication with their side is the final piece of evidence Cho needs for the federal case. Once he makes contact to confirm the transport, she has everything. Nora looked at the toast on her table, picked it up, put it back down. This is a solid plan, she said. I hate being in a hospital bed while it runs. I know. I especially hate that I understand exactly why I have to be. You had surgery 11 days ago, Cole said. You have a cracked rib and a healing entry wound. If you were in that vehicle and something went sideways. I know, she said. I said I hate it. I didn't say I was going to argue. She finally picked up the toast and took a bite, chewed, looked out the window. What about Eddie? Still in Yakima. Pharaoh talked to him yesterday. He's scared but stable. His wife is managing. The kids think it's an unplanned vacation, which is about the best possible outcome for them right now. When this is over, Eddie is going to need serious witness protection infrastructure. Federal level. Cho is already in conversation with the U.S. Attorney's office, Cole said. It's moving. Nora nodded slowly. Then she looked back at him. Where will you be? On Friday. There was a pause, slight but present. Running the information side, Cole said. Monitoring communications, tracking the network's response in real time, feeding Arkin and Cho's team what they need. From where? From wherever makes the most sense logistically. She gave him a look that was direct and not entirely convinced. Cole, I'm not going into the field, he said. That's not what this is. Okay, she said, in a tone that suggested she was accepting the statement for now and reserving the right to revisit it. He drove to the depot and worked his morning shift. And he thought about Friday the way he thought about most things that required planning, not with anxiety, but with the methodical attention of someone mapping terrain. The plan was good. The logic was clean. The pieces would move the way pieces moved when they were set correctly. He believed all of that. He also knew the way he had always known things that mattered in high-stakes environments, that believing a plan is sound is not the same as believing nothing will go wrong. Nothing ever ran entirely the way it was designed to run. The value of planning was not that it prevented the unexpected. The value of planning was that it built enough structure around you that when the unexpected happened, you had something to work from rather than nothing. He believed that too. Thursday passed in the careful, quiet way of the day before something important. Cole helped Sadie with a book report on a novel about a girl who moves to a new city and finds an unexpected community. Sadie's summary was characteristically analytical, noting that the main character's growth felt earned because the author showed the specific friction of the adjustment rather than glossing over it. Cole listened to her, read him a paragraph, and told her it was excellent, which it was, and she said she knew but wanted a second opinion anyway. After she went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table with the floor plan of the route Arkin would drive on Friday, which Cho had sent him in an encrypted file, and he went over it for the third time. 3 points where the vehicle would be most exposed. 2 intersections where a following vehicle could position without being obvious. 1 stretch of industrial road near the south waterfront where the sight lines opened up, and anyone intending to intercept would have the clearest opportunity. That was where they would move, if they moved. Cole had flagged it to Cho and to Pharaoh's people. They knew. He put the floor plan away at 11:30 and went to bed, and for the first time in the week and a half since he had stopped on a rain-soaked highway, he slept well. Not because the situation was under control, it wasn't, not entirely, but because the specific kind of pre-operation calm had settled into him that he recognized from a previous life. The place he went when there was nothing left to prepare and the only remaining variable was time. Friday came gray and cold, the kind of Pacific Northwest morning that looked the same at 7 as it did at noon, the cloud cover uniform and flat and total. Cole dropped Sadie at school, drove to the station, and set up in a borrowed office on the second floor with a laptop, Cho's communications feed, and a radio on the frequency Arkin's team would be using. Pharaoh came in at 8:45 and closed the door behind him. Mears came in at 7, Pharaoh said. He kept his voice low out of habit, though no one was near enough to hear. He's in his office. behaving normally. IT has a monitor on his department-issued devices. Has he communicated? One outgoing call at 7:58 from his personal cell. 11 seconds. To a number that traces to a prepaid registered in Tacoma. Farrow paused. Which was purchased 6 weeks ago. We're working on connecting it to a Vantage Group subsidiary. 11 seconds is enough, Cole said. He made the call. That's enough for Cho's purposes. She says yes. Farrow looked at the laptop screen and then at Cole. Arkin leaves the department at 9:15. He'll have the document bag empty, obviously, but looks right from outside the vehicle. 2 AG vehicles running parallel routes as shadow support. State police have checkpoints at the bridge and the interchange, but they're not visible. Who knows the full setup? You, me, Cho, Arkin, and 3 people on Cho's team who have been completely off any Blackridge Department communication channels since Tuesday. Farrow's jaw was set. Nobody inside the department except me and Arkin knows the details of the parallel coverage. Good, Cole said. Farrow looked at him for a moment. How are you? I'm fine, Cole. I'm fine, Dennis. He used the first name deliberately, which was not something he did often. Farrow seemed to register it. Let's just get through the day. Farrow nodded and left. Cole sat at the laptop and watched the communication feeds and waited for Arkin's vehicle to leave the building. The first 40 minutes ran exactly as planned, which was the part of any operation Cole trusted least, because perfect early execution created a particular kind of complacency that the unexpected fed on. He noted it and stayed attentive. Arkin checked in at 9:22 from the vehicle calm professional, the understated manner of a man who had been doing difficult work for a long time and saw no reason to perform urgency. The 2 AG shadow vehicles were in position. The state police checkpoints were holding. Cho's team had a line on the prepaid number Mears had called, and at 9:31 they picked up a second call from that number to another prepaid in the Blackridge South Side. The network was activating. They were tracking the vehicle. Somewhere in the city, someone with a Vantage Group connection was making decisions about where and when to move. Cole watched the feeds and felt the particular focused stillness that he had once known the way other people knew breathing. At 9:47, Arkin's radio clicked. Got a tail. Dark blue pickup, 2 occupants, been with me since the Harbison Street intersection. They're staying 3 cars back, but the pattern is consistent. Copy, Cole said into the radio. Hold your route. Shadow units are aware. Copy that. Cole relayed the pickup's description to Cho's team. Within 4 minutes, they had a partial plate confirmation and a match to a vehicle registered to a shell company with a chain of ownership that terminated 3 steps in at a Vantage Group subsidiary. He sent that to Cho with a timestamp. Everything was working. The trap was closing. Then at 10:03, his phone buzzed. The screen read Farrow urgent. He picked up. We have a problem, Farrow said. His voice was controlled but tight, in a way Cole had not heard from him before. Mears left the building 6 minutes ago. Told his assistant he had a dental appointment. He didn't file a leave notice, and he doesn't have a dental appointment, I checked. Cole processed that quickly. He's not just feeding information. He's going personally. That's what I'm thinking, Farrow said. Which means either he's spooked and running, or the network told him to go somewhere specific, Cole said. Where's the last ping on his personal cell? Heading south on Meridian Avenue toward the waterfront. Cole looked at the route map on the laptop screen. The waterfront stretch, the industrial road, the sightlines. The place he had flagged as the highest probability intercept point. The south waterfront corridor, Cole said. That's where they're going to make their move on Arkin. The shadow units can intercept. Get them moving now, Cole said. And get Arkin off the route. Tell him to hold at the Crestfield intersection and do not proceed south. He heard Farrow relaying it. Then Farrow's voice came back. Arkin is holding. Shadow units are repositioning. ETA to the corridor is 7 minutes. 7 minutes was a number Cole understood in a specific way. He had spent years understanding what 7 minutes meant and didn't mean in situations where the variable was human action. He looked at the communications feed. The blue pickup that had been tailing Arkin had dropped back. It had probably picked up on the route change. Or it had already received word that the main event was not the vehicle, that the vehicle was a diversion, that the real objective was something else. Cole went through the logic fast. Mears heading to the waterfront personally. The tail dropping off Arkin. The network had 2 tracks running. Arkin was one of them. But if Mears was going somewhere specific, Pharaoh. Cole was already standing, jacket in hand. Where is Nora's new room in the hospital? Which floor? Which wing? A beat, a short, terrible beat. 3rd floor north wing, Pharaoh said slowly. Cole, how many officers on her door right now? 1, Richards. He's been on since 6. Get another unit to that hospital right now, Cole said. Move, he was already out the door. He drove the 8 blocks to the hospital in under 4 minutes, which was not safe and which he did not particularly care about. He pulled into the emergency bay, left the truck running, and went through the ER entrance because it was faster than the main lobby. 3rd floor north wing required an elevator or the stairwell. He took the stairwell at a run, pushed through the door at the 3rd floor, and came into the corridor moving. The officer Richards was standing outside Nora's door in the posture of someone who was alert, but had not yet seen anything requiring more than alertness. He registered Cole approaching at speed and put a hand up. Sir Cole Hawthorne, Cole said, not slowing much. Pharaoh's consultant. Is she in there? Yes, she's... Has anyone been in since your shift started who wasn't medical staff? Richards frowned. Maintenance came by around 9:40. Checking a reported issue with the heating unit in one of the rooms. He had a badge. Which room did he go to? He said it was the room 2 doors down, but then Richards stopped. His expression shifted. He went past that room. Cole was already moving toward the door. He didn't knock. He pushed it open and stepped through. Nora was in the bed, and she was not alone. There was a man standing near the window on the far side of the room, heavyset, work clothes, a tool bag on the floor beside him that had nothing to do with heating maintenance. He was holding a phone. He had been looking at the window when Cole came in, checking something outside, and the fraction of a second it took him to register, the door opening, was the fraction of a second Cole used. Cole crossed the room in 4 steps. The man turned, started to raise the phone, which was not a phone, or not only a phone, and Cole got his wrist before whatever it was came up into position, turned it, used the man's own momentum and the physics of leverage that he had not consciously thought about in 5 years, but which lived in his hands, the way certain things lived in hands that had practiced them enough. The man went into the wall. The device hit the floor. Cole put a knee in the man's back and his forearm across his shoulders and held him there with the specific controlled pressure of someone who is preventing movement without causing damage, and he said to Nora, who was sitting up in the bed with her eyes wide and her hand braced against her cracked rib, "Are you hurt?" "No," she said. Her voice was steady. "I'm not hurt." "Good." To Richards, who had come through the door behind him, "Cuff him and call it in." Richards had his cuffs out already. Cole stepped back and let the officer take over. He straightened and looked at the device on the floor, a modified phone with the secondary component attached, the purpose of which he didn't need to analyze in detail to understand. He looked at Nora. She was still gripping the bed rail, her knuckles whitened, her breathing careful around the rib. She was managing, the way she always managed. They split the operation, she said. Yes, they were never primarily after Arkin's vehicle. No, Cole said. The vehicle was meant to pull attention south. This was the real objective. She looked at the man being cuffed on her floor, with an expression that was complicated relief and fury in roughly equal measure. How did you know? When Mears left the building heading toward the waterfront, Cole said, it didn't add up. If he was just confirming the operation from a safe distance, he'd stay mobile, stay off location. Going to the waterfront personally meant he was coordinating something at the waterfront, which meant the waterfront wasn't the only location, it was the cover. Nora was quiet for a moment. The document bag Arkin is carrying is empty. The network doesn't know that yet, Cole said. But even if they eventually find out, they still know you have the drive. And he stopped, adjusted. If you were gone, the drive becomes an evidence problem rather than a testimony problem. She absorbed that, the specific meaning of it. They were trying to make sure I couldn't testify. That's what I think. She let go of the bed rail, lowered her hand carefully to the blanket. She was processing the fact that someone had just tried to kill her a second time, which is not a thing a person processes easily or quickly, and Cole knew better than to talk her through it or around it. He waited. Okay, she said finally. Okay, she reached for her phone. I need to call Cho. The South Waterfront operation moved on schedule despite everything. Cho's team intercepted two vehicles in the industrial corridor, the blue pickup that had been tailing Arkin, and a second vehicle that had been waiting in a parking structure near the waterfront, engine running, positioned at the precise spot Cole had flagged on the route map the night before. 4 men were taken into custody. All 4 had connections to Vantage Group subsidiaries that Cho's team was able to establish within hours. Harold Mears was found parked 2 blocks from the hospital in his personal vehicle when the units arrived to pick him up. He was still sitting in the driver's seat with his phone in his hand. According to the officer who took him into custody, he said nothing at all, just looked at the badge and then looked through the windshield and sat very still for a moment before he got out of the car. 22 years, Cole thought when Farrow told him. 22 years, and it ends in a parking garage 2 blocks from a hospital where a woman you helped put in the crosshairs is still alive. He didn't say that out loud. The arrests moved quickly after that. Cho's office had been building the federal case for months, and the events of Friday gave her the final operational evidence she needed. By Saturday evening, warrants had been executed on 3 Vantage Group offices in Washington and Oregon. Meridian Transport's operations were suspended pending investigation. The prepaid phone network that Mears had used to communicate was traced and unwound, connecting 6 Blackridge PD officers to the broader conspiracy, all of them in administrative or support roles, none of them in Farrow's operational circle, which was either good luck or a reflection of how carefully the network had selected its points of entry. Cole learned most of this from Farrow in phone calls over the weekend, delivered in the flat and exhausted voice of someone moving through a situation that was resolving in the right direction and not finding that resolution as satisfying as they had expected to find it. 22 years, Farrow said on Saturday night. Not as a moral statement, just as a fact he seemed to be holding up and looking at. I know, Cole said. He had his daughter's photographs on his desk. From college. She's pre-med. Farrow stopped. I don't know why I'm telling you that. Because it's hard, Cole said. Even when it's right. A pause. Yeah, go home, Dennis. Sleep I will. Cole Farrow stopped. Thank you. For today specifically and for all of it. I'll stop by Monday, Cole said. We still have things to finish. The thing they still had to finish was Lauren. Cole had known it was coming and had deliberately given himself the weekend not to think about it, or rather, to think about it in the background, in the way he processed things that required more than logic to process. He spent Saturday taking Sadie to the farmer's market, where she spent 45 minutes debating the merits of 2 different hot sauces with a vendor who was extremely patient about it. He spent Saturday evening making pancakes for dinner, because they had missed their standing Saturday morning slot during the chaos of the week, and Sadie ate 3 and declared them adequate, which was her highest informal rating. He spent Sunday fixing the gutter on the north side of the house, which he had been meaning to do for 2 years. It took most of the afternoon and required a trip to the hardware store and a degree of balancing on a ladder that he was too old to find uncomplicated. When he came inside, Sadie was at the kitchen table with her book, and she looked up and said, "You finally fixed the gutter." Finally, he agreed. "Good," she said, and went back to reading. He stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment looking at her. The light was coming in low through the west window, catching the dust in the air, and Sadie was sitting with her chin in her hand and her finger moving along a line of text with the concentration she brought to books she was genuinely inside. And she looked so precisely like Lauren in that posture, the slight forward lean, the unconscious way she had of making the room around her irrelevant. When something had her full attention, that Cole felt it in his chest, the way he still sometimes felt it 5 years out, without warning. He went and made coffee and didn't say anything about it. On Monday morning, he drove to the station and sat across from Farrow and Cho, and they laid out for him what the investigation had assembled about Lauren's death. All of it. The documentation that had been buried by the compromised deputies, the Meridian vehicle logs that showed a white panel van operating in Coverton County on the evening she died, the recovered financial records that traced a payment described in the Vantage Group ledger, simply as a field resolution fee to a contractor the Aegean office had now identified and was actively pursuing. Cole sat and listened to all of it. He asked questions when he needed to, and the questions were specific and factual, and Cho answered them in the same manner. When they finished, Cole was quiet for a while. The contractor, he said. The field resolution. We have a name and a last known location, Cho said carefully. He is a current active subject of a federal criminal investigation. I want to be clear about that. I'm not going to do anything to compromise your case, Cole said. I need you to understand that I understand what you're telling me. Cho looked at him for a moment. I do understand that, she said. I'm saying it for the record. Understood. Farrow leaned forward. The case is being formally reopened under federal jurisdiction. Cho's office will be handling it in conjunction with the U.S. Attorney. Lauren's case will be resolved in court. It may take time, but it will be resolved. He paused. Cole, it will be resolved. Cole looked at the table. The surface of it was institutional wood grain. The kind of table that had been in 1,000 conference rooms, just like this one, scratched and water-stained and holding up regardless. He looked at it for a long moment. 5 years. The specific weight of 5 years of not knowing, of knowing something was wrong, and having nowhere to direct that knowledge, of building a life around the gap where the truth should have been. Sadie doing homework at the kitchen table. Mrs. Dalton's soup on the stove. The late delivery routes through the dark. All of it built over something he had never been able to see clearly. Now he could see it. He could see all of it. And the seeing was not, in the immediate moment, the relief he might have expected. It was more like something finally coming to rest. Like a door that had been open a few inches for 5 years was now at last fully closed. Thank you, he said, to Cho specifically, for doing this the right way. Cho nodded once in the direct and economical way she had of acknowledging things. Cole stood up, shook hands with Farrow, then with Cho, then with Arkin, who had been sitting in his customary corner spot with his notepad and his flat attention. Arkin, Cole said. Hawthorne, Arkin said. They looked at each other for a moment with the mutual recognition of two people who communicate primarily through paying attention to things, and then Cole nodded and Arkin nodded, and that was the end of it. He drove to the hospital. Nora was being discharged that afternoon. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, in street clothes, dark jeans, a gray sweater, moving carefully because the rib was still painful, but dressed and oriented forward in the way of someone done with being stationary. She had a bag packed on the chair beside her, and the laptop already closed and in its case. They got Mears to talk, she said when Cole came in. Cho told me this morning. He's cooperating fully in exchange for a sentencing consideration. He's been feeding information to the network for 6 years. 6 years, Cole said. He started with small things. Travel information. Scheduling. The kind of thing that seemed harmless. She said it without particular anger, though Cole suspected the anger was there underneath, just organized into something more useful. By the time it wasn't small anymore, he was too far in to walk out. Does that change how you feel about it? She thought about it genuinely, which was something he had come to expect from her. She didn't answer questions reflexively. It makes it more comprehensible, she said finally. It doesn't make it better. But I think there's some value in comprehending how it happens. Because if I just file it under bad person, I don't understand anything useful. Cole agreed with that, more than he said. How are you? She asked. They finished briefing me on Lauren's case this morning. Nora was quiet for a moment. All of it. And he sat down in the chair that had been his chair for the past week and a half. The Venetian blinds were letting in the same afternoon light, doing the same things to the floor. The room was about to stop being this room she was leaving today, and this would just be a hospital room again. And I think I can move now, he said. That's the best way I know to put it. I think I can actually move now. Nora looked at him for a long time. Not with pity, which he would not have welcomed, and not with the careful tenderness of someone managing a fragile thing. She looked at him the way she looked at everything directly, with the respect of taking what was said seriously. Good, she said. They sat in the quiet for a moment. Eddie is going to be okay, she said. Cho confirmed this morning. Federal program. The whole family. They'll have to relocate, but they'll be safe. That's what matters, Cole said. Yeah. She picked up the bag from the chair. Winced slightly. Cole stood up and took the bag from her without making a production of it, and she let him, which he understood was its own statement. My sister's picking me up, she said. She's been wanting to say something uncomplimentary to me about taking risks since last week, and I've been delaying the conversation, but I think I've run out of runway. Probably deserved, Cole said. Probably, she agreed. She stood and picked up the laptop case, and they walked out of the room and down the corridor together toward the elevator, and neither of them said anything for a moment, in the comfortable way of people who have been through something difficult together and no longer need to fill the silence to make it feel okay. In the elevator, she said, "What happens now? For you?" "I pick up Sadie at 3:17, Cole said. "I think she wants to tell me something about a history quiz." Nora looked at the elevator doors. And after that, he thought about it. The gutter was fixed. The case was open. Lauren's name was in the right files for the first time in 5 years. "I'm going to make pancakes Saturday," he said, "and start figuring out the rest from there." The elevator opened on the ground floor. The lobby was its usual busy self-visitors, staff, the ordinary movement of a place that dealt with hard things and kept going regardless. Nora's sister was visible through the front doors, standing beside a car with the expression of someone who had spent 11 days worrying and had not yet finished expressing that fact. Nora looked at Cole. "Thank you," she said. "Not the way people say it to fill space." "The other way. Get well," he said. "Eat real food. Don't open the laptop for at least 3 days." "2," she said. "3." She almost smiled, picked up the laptop case, shifted it to her other shoulder to ease the rib, and walked through the front doors toward her sister. Cole stood in the lobby for a moment after she was gone. Then he turned and walked back through the building to the parking bay where he had left his truck running 11 days ago, in another version of this situation entirely. He sat in the driver's seat. The cab smelled like cardboard and old coffee and the faint wet wool smell of the blanket he kept behind the seat. Ordinary smells. The smells of the life he had built and intended to keep building. He looked at the clock on the dash, 2:41. He had 36 minutes before Sadie's school let out. He pulled out of the hospital parking bay and pointed the truck toward her school, and he drove through the gray Blackridge afternoon, thinking about Lauren not with the specific, careful containment he had practiced for 5 years, not with the managed distance he had maintained to stay functional, but openly, the way you think about someone who was real and is gone, and whose absence was finally, after a very long time, sitting in the right place in the chest. Sad, not broken. Present, not paralyzing. Lauren, who had stopped to help a stranger on a roadside because she was a nurse and that was who she was. Lauren, who had died because being that kind of person had put her in the wrong place at the wrong time, not randomly, not meaninglessly, but because of something specific and real that now had names attached to it and would eventually have consequences attached to those names. He thought about her the whole drive, and when he pulled into the school parking lot and joined the line of parents in their ordinary vehicles, he sat with it until the school doors opened and the kids started coming through. Sadie in the yellow rain jacket, backpack on both shoulders. Talking to her friend, she spotted the truck, said something that made her friend laugh. Jogged over. She climbed in, buckled up, reached for her seatbelt with the efficiency of a kid who has done it 10,000 times. "History quiz," she said immediately. "I got a 94. "Out of 100? Out of 100. "That's excellent," he said. "I missed one question about the Missouri Compromise because I mixed up the dates, which is annoying because I knew the dates, I just wrote the wrong year." She settled back.
"How was your day?"
Cole looked at his daughter, at the unbothered certainty she carried, the way she occupied her own skin without apology. The 10-year-old's absolute faith that the world was generally navigable and that her father was generally present in it, and that these two facts were related and reliable. "My day was good," he said, and meant it, in the complicated way that good days sometimes mean carrying loss and resolution, and the faint beginning of something that was not yet clear enough to name, but that felt, for the first time in a long time, like it was moving forward. He put the truck in drive, and they headed home through the gray afternoon, and Sadie talked about the Missouri Compromise, and Cole listened, and the ordinary life held. The federal trial of Harold Mears and 4 Vantage Group operatives began 14 months after the arrests, in a courtroom in Seattle that was considerably less dramatic than the events that had led to it. Courtrooms usually were. The machinery of justice moved in documents and testimony and procedural motions, not in rain-soaked highways and hospital rooms and the particular controlled tension of a Friday morning when everything could have gone differently. Cole testified on the 3rd day. He sat in the witness chair and answered questions from the assistant U.S. attorney in the measured, factual manner he had always used when the situation required precision over color. He described what he had observed on the highway. He described the field treatment. He described the process of working with Farrow and Cho, the analysis of the communication logs, the identification of the fleet tracking vulnerability. He answered the defense's cross-examination with the same composure, and when the defense attorney suggested that his involvement had been irregular and potentially prejudicial to the investigation, Cole agreed that it had been irregular and explained, without heat, exactly why irregular had been necessary given the circumstances. He was on the stand for 3 hours. When he stepped down, Nora was sitting in the gallery in a dark blazer, her posture straight and slightly careful around the left side in a way that was nearly invisible if you didn't know to look for it. She caught his eye when he passed and gave him the small, direct nod that he had come to understand as her version of a full range of expressions that other people needed more words for. She testified the following day. Cole was in the gallery for it. She was precise, thorough, and entirely without performance. She laid out 8 months of informal investigation work, the development of Eddie Trask as a source, the specific chain of events leading to the night she was shot, and the subsequent evidence trail that connected Meridian Transport to Vantage Group and Vantage Group to the deaths and compromised officials and financial crimes that stretched across a decade and a half of the Pacific Northwest. She was on the stand for 4 hours, and when the defense attempted to characterize her informal investigation as a reckless deviation from procedure, she agreed that it had deviated from procedure and explained, calmly and in specific detail, why the procedure would have been insufficient given the depth of the internal compromise. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The verdicts came back on a Thursday morning in November, and Cole was not in the courtroom when they were read. He was at Sadie's school for a parent-teacher conference that had been scheduled for 6 weeks, and which he was not going to reschedule regardless of what was happening in Seattle. He sat across from Sadie's teacher, Mrs. Corrigan, who turned out to have a sharper sense of humor than her formal emails suggested, and listened to a detailed and largely positive assessment of Sadie's academic performance, including a specific note that her argumentative writing had improved significantly in the past semester, and that she had a tendency to overinvest in the topics she found most interesting at the expense of the one she found less interesting, which was Mrs. Corrigan said a very human problem to have and not the worst one. Cole's phone buzzed in his jacket pocket partway through the conference. He did not look at it. He looked at it in the parking lot after. Show. 2 words. All counts. He sat in the truck for a moment with the phone in his hand looking at those 2 words. All counts. Mears, the 4 Vantage Group operatives, and in a separate proceeding that had concluded 3 weeks earlier, the contractor identified in Lauren's case. A man named Deschner, 51, who had worked for a Vantage Group security subsidiary for 9 years, and whose financial records connected him directly to the payment logged in the Vantage Group ledger as a field resolution fee on the date Lauren died. Deschner had also taken all counts. Cole sat with the phone in his hand for a while. The parking lot around him was the ordinary afternoon of a school parking lot, other parents coming and going, a crossing guard in an orange vest at the corner, 2 kids chasing each other around a bike rack for reasons unclear. The ordinary life in its ordinary motion. He thought about Lauren. Not the way he had thought about her for 5 years, not with the careful, managed quality of someone maintaining their footing near something unstable, but in the open way that had become possible since the night at Farrow's conference table with the photograph. He thought about who she actually was, the nurse who stopped for strangers, the woman who had married a Navy SEAL and learned early that she was going to spend a lot of time worrying about someone who moved through the world in ways she could not fully follow, and had decided, with the particular pragmatic grace that was entirely hers, that loving him was worth the cost of that worry. The mother who made up voices for Sadie's picture books, and who had a specific and irrational attachment to a pair of green rain boots that she wore everywhere from October to April, regardless of what she was wearing otherwise. The woman who had died on a county road because she stopped to help someone, and the world she stopped in was more dangerous than she knew and less fair than she deserved. Cole put the phone in his pocket, drove to pick up Sadie. He told her about the verdicts that evening after dinner, sitting at the kitchen table. Not everything, not the contractor, not the full weight of what Deschner's conviction meant, but enough. He told her that the people responsible for what happened to her mother had been in court, and that the court had found them guilty, and that Lauren's case was now officially closed. Sadie listened to all of it without interrupting, which was not her usual mode, but which she deployed on occasions that she recognized, instinctively as requiring it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at the table, and then she said, "Does that help? Knowing?" "Yes," Cole said. "It does." She thought about that. "Does it change anything? Like, does it make anything feel different?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "It changes the feeling of the not knowing," he said. "The knowing is its own thing, but the not knowing had its own weight. And I think that's gone now." Sadie looked at him for a moment with the focus she had when she was absorbing something that needed to settle rather than be immediately responded to. Then she said okay, in the way that meant she was going to sit with it, and got up to clear her plate. Cole watched her rinse her plate and put it in the rack the way he had taught her, and thought that she was going to be okay. Had always probably been going to be okay. She had her mother's particular combination of emotional intelligence and forward motion, but now he could think it without the specific anxiety of a man who knows he is the only thing standing between a child and a world that has already demonstrated its capacity for cruelty. He wasn't the only thing anymore. The case was closed. The people were in custody. The ground was solid. He could stand on it without bracing. The conversation about what came next happened in pieces, over the months that followed the verdicts, and the first piece was with Nora. She had gone back to work in January, cleared for full duty after the final surgical follow-up, and she had gone back the way she did most things without announcement or ceremony, just showing up and being exactly who she was. She and Cole had stayed in contact through the trial preparation in the steady, uncomplicated manner of people who had been through something together, and found that the something had left them with a genuine interest in how the other person was doing. Not a fraught connection, not loaded with the weight of what they had both survived. Just honest. The way friendships are when they start in a situation that burned off all the usual social scaffolding. She met him for coffee in February at a place on the east side of downtown that neither of them had suggested. They'd ended up there by the logic of proximity and available parking, and over coffee that was significantly better than anything that had ever been produced by the hospital vending machine, she said. "What are you going to do?" "About what?" "About the fact that you're clearly still thinking about the work." She wrapped her hands around her cup. "I've been watching you for 8 months, Cole. You didn't advise like someone who had put that part of himself away. You advised like someone who had been keeping it in a room and was surprised how naturally it came back when the door opened." He looked at the table. "I left for a reason. You left because Sadie needed a present parent, and Lauren was gone, and you made the right call for that moment. I'm not arguing with the original decision." She paused. "I'm asking about the current one." Cole was quiet for a moment. "What would you suggest?" "I'd suggest that there's a version of this that doesn't require you to choose between being Sadie's father and using what you know." She looked at him steadily. "The emergency response training you did, the way you treated me on that highway, the way you thought through the threat environment and the vulnerability assessment. That's not military aggression. That's the medicine side of what you did. The keep people alive side." He looked at her. "There's a significant gap," she said, "between what civilian first responders are trained to do and what's actually possible with more advanced trauma and threat response knowledge. Farrow has been talking to the County Emergency Management Office about it for months. The county doesn't have a training resource for complex scenarios, mass casualty preparation, active threat medical response, high-risk environment first aid for people who aren't military and aren't going to become military, but who might, at some point, be the person standing next to someone who needs help." Cole said nothing. "The department would partner with it," Nora said. "Farrow would. The county EM office would. There's a facility on the south side, an old community training center, that the city has been trying to find programming for." And she stopped. "Cole, you stopped on a highway in the middle of a storm because someone needed help and you had the skills to give it. That's not a one-time thing. That's who you are. There's a way to do something with that." He drank his coffee. Outside the window, February in Blackridge was its usual gray and unimpressive self, the street wet with the kind of persistent light rain that was too thin to use an umbrella for and too steady to ignore. "I'd need to think about it," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm not asking you to decide right now. I'm asking you to stop pretending the question isn't there." He looked at her. She looked back. The particular directness that had been the first thing he registered about her, lying on a wet road in the dark, the quality of someone who had chosen, at some point, to simply look at things squarely and dispense with the option of looking away. Okay, he said, I'll stop pretending. He thought about it for 6 weeks. He thought about it while driving his delivery routes, while helping Sadie with her homework, while fixing the kitchen faucet that had developed a persistent drip in March. He turned it over in the way he turned over decisions that were primarily logical, the kind that required him to listen to something underneath the reasoning. What he heard underneath the reasoning was that Nora was right. Not about everything. Not about the shape of it exactly, which he had thoughts about that were different from hers. But right that the door was open, and he was standing in front of it, pretending it wasn't, which was a posture he had maintained for 5 years out of necessity, and which had outlasted its necessity. He called Faro in the 3rd week of March. The training center, he said. The one on the south side. Still available, Faro said immediately. The city has been holding it. I want to design the curriculum myself, Cole said. Not adapt someone else's program. Build it from the ground up to address what actually happens to real people in real situations, not military scenarios, not Hollywood scenarios. The things that happen on highways and in offices and in schools, and in the gap between when something goes wrong and when professional help arrives. I think that's exactly what's needed, Faro said. I'll need support on the certification side, legal structure, insurance, grant writing probably, because I don't have startup capital. Cho's office has connections to a state emergency preparedness fund that we've been laying groundwork with for 2 months, Faro said, in the tone of someone who had been waiting for this call. Cole was quiet for a moment. You've been planning this without me. We've been preparing the infrastructure for a decision we hoped you'd make, Faro said. There's a difference. Is there? Marginally. A pause. Cole, you saved Nora's life on that highway. You identified the internal compromise, built the operational plan, and prevented what happened at the hospital from being worse than it was. You did all of that while being extremely clear that you were operating within boundaries you had set for yourself. That kind of person with that kind of discipline and that kind of skill, teaching civilians how to stay alive in the gap before help arrives, that's not nothing. That's genuinely necessary. Cole looked out his kitchen window at the backyard, where Sadie had left a library book on the porch chair and it had started to rain. I have to talk to Sadie, he said. Of course, Faro said. He talked to Sadie on a Saturday morning in April, over the pancakes they had reinstated as a standing weekend tradition sometime in the fall. She was 11 now, with the 11-year-old version of her mother's forward-leaning focus, and she listened to the whole idea with the serious attention she brought to things that she understood mattered. When he finished, she asked 3 questions. The first was whether he would still drive her to school. The second was whether the building on the south side had a parking lot. The third, the one that surprised him, was whether other kids could come to any of the training sessions, because she thought learning basic first aid would be useful, and her current knowledge was, in her assessment, inadequate. Cole sat across from her with a spatula in his hand and felt something in his chest that took him a moment to identify as a particular kind of uncomplicated happiness. The kind that doesn't come with conditions. Yes, he said. To all 3. Good, she said, and held out her plate for a second pancake. The Hawthorne Emergency Response Institute opened in September, in the building on the south side of Blackridge that had been repainted over the summer by a volunteer crew that included, on a warm Saturday in July, Nora Vásquez and her sister, and Ray Caulfield, and 2 officers from Faro's department and Arkin, who turned out to be an efficient and entirely silent painter who covered more square footage per hour than anyone else there. The first curriculum cohort was 17 people, a mix of teachers, 2 school nurses, a handful of office workers, a retired firefighter who wanted to update his training, and 4 parents who had seen the community announcement and signed up with the specific parental anxiety of people who wanted to be useful in a crisis and currently did not know how. Cole taught the first session himself. He stood in front of 17 people who had no military background, no tactical training, and no desire to acquire either, and he taught them how to stop serious bleeding with their hands and whatever was available, how to recognize a medical emergency from the outside when the person inside it was not capable of asking for help, how to make rapid decisions in the specific cognitive fog that descends when something frightening happens in a place you thought was safe. He was not a natural teacher in the performance sense. He did not have the instinctive showmanship of someone who thrived in front of a crowd. What he had was precision and patience, and the quality of someone who genuinely believed that the person across from him was capable of learning something important if it was explained correctly. It turned out that those things were more useful than showmanship. At the end of the first session, a woman named Patricia, not Mrs. Dalton, a different Patricia, though the coincidence made Cole briefly smile, came up and said that she had signed up because her husband had a heart condition, and she had spent 2 years being afraid of the specific moment she feared was coming, and she wanted to know what to do when it happened. She said the session had given her something she couldn't quite name yet, but that felt like the beginning of a different relationship with fear. Cole thought about that for a long time afterward. Beginning of a different relationship with fear. It was probably the most accurate description of what the Institute was trying to do that he had heard, and he had not written it himself. He incorporated it into the curriculum materials. Nora started coming to the Institute on Tuesday evenings in October, ostensibly to observe the intermediate sessions for professional development purposes, which was technically accurate and also clearly not the entire picture. She and Cole had been navigating the space between the professional connection that had started on a highway and whatever it was becoming with the particular care of two people who were not going to rush. Something that mattered into a shape it wasn't ready for. They were careful. They were honest about the fact that they were being careful. They had coffee twice a week and dinner occasionally, and Sadie had met Nora in September at the Institute's open house and had assessed her with the thoroughgoing attention she brought to new variables in her ecosystem, and then said, on the drive home, that Nora had asked good questions and seemed like someone who actually listened when people answered them, which Sadie regarded as a non-negotiable quality in a person. Cole received this assessment and did not say anything in particular, but he was smiling for the rest of the drive. It was not fast. It was not uncomplicated. There were evenings when it was easier to be alone, and evenings when alone was the wrong word for what it actually was. There were moments when moving towards something new felt like the most natural thing in the world, and moments when it felt like standing at the edge of something with uncertain footing, aware of the distance down. He did not pretend those moments weren't there. He had learned, the hard way and over many years, that pretending things weren't there was a temporary solution to a permanent condition. What he had also learned more recently, in the specific crucible of the past 14 months, was that standing still was not the same as being safe. He had spent 5 years believing that if he held the perimeter of his life steady enough, nothing else could get through. He had been wrong about that. The highway had taught him what he should have already known, that the world came to you regardless. That the choice was not between exposure and safety. The choice was what you did when the exposure arrived. He had stopped. That was his answer. He had stopped and gotten out of the truck. He thought that was going to be his answer for the rest of his life, in situations large and small, in moments that required something from him that he would rather not have been required. He would probably not always get it right. He had not always gotten it right. But the direction was clear now in a way it hadn't been for a long time. On a Thursday evening in November, exactly 1 year and 31 days after the night on the highway, Cole closed the Institute at 8:30 and drove across town to Nora's apartment, where they had planned to have dinner because she had been claiming for 3 weeks that she was capable of cooking a real meal, and he had been expressing careful skepticism that she appeared to find motivating. The meal, it turned out, was a lamb stew that was genuinely excellent, which she received his acknowledgement of with the satisfaction of someone who had made a point. They ate at her kitchen table with the easy conversation of people who have passed the stage of monitoring themselves and arrived at the stage of simply talking about the Institute's second cohort, which was starting in January and already oversubscribed, about a case she was working that she described in the careful generalities of someone who had learned to compartmentalize without making the other person feel compartmentalized, about Sadie's current obsession with marine biology, which had temporarily displaced her previous obsession with ecosystem nitrogen cycles, and which Cole suspected would result in a request to visit an aquarium at the earliest opportunity. After dinner, sitting on her couch with the remains of the wine they had opened, and the comfortable quiet of an evening winding down, Nora said, "How are you?" Actually. He looked at her. The directness that was simply who she was, the refusal to accept the surface version when she was genuinely asking about the thing underneath it. "I'm good," he said, "actually." "The Institute?" "The Institute it's the right thing. I know that now. The first cohort had a woman who told me on the last day that she'd spent 2 years afraid of a moment she couldn't prepare for, and the course changed that for her." He paused. "That matters. That's the kind of mattering that I can do now, in this life, with this daughter, in this city. It's not what I did before. It's better, in the ways that count." Nora was quiet for a moment. "Lauren would have liked it," she said. Not carefully, not with the tentative tiptoeing people did around the name. Just said it, the way she had always said things. "Yeah," Cole said. "She would have." They sat with that for a moment, and it was not painful in the way it once would have been. It was the particular quality of things that are sad and true and also okay to say out loud. "I've been thinking," Nora said, "about what you said last February. About the not knowing having its own weight and that weight being gone now." "I remember. I've been thinking that there's a parallel version of that for me," she said. "A weight that I had that I don't think I registered as a weight until it was gone. The weight of," she stopped, searched for the right word, "of operating alone. Inside a thing that was getting too big to hold alone and not being willing to put it down because I didn't know who I could trust to hold it with me." Cole looked at her. "You trusted me," he said. "On the highway, in the rain, you handed me the phone and told me where the wound was and trusted me to know what to do." "You gave me a reason to," she said. "You stopped." "You didn't have to stop." "Yes, I did," he said. And he meant it fully, not as modesty, not as a deflection, but as the accurate description of a person who understood, finally and completely, that the things that feel optional in the moment are sometimes the things you were always going to do. That the gap between who you have been and who you are is sometimes smaller than the fear of looking at it. Nora looked at him for a long moment. "Okay," she said, in the way that meant she was accepting something true and choosing to stand next to it. They sat together in her apartment on the Thursday evening in November with the dinner cleaned up, and the wine mostly finished, and it was not dramatic and it was not resolved into some clean and final shape. There was still work ahead on the Institute, on the case she was working, on the careful and deliberate navigation of whatever they were becoming to each other. Sadie was going to have opinions about the aquarium and the marine biology unit, and probably also about approximately everything else, in the way she had opinions about everything, which was one of Cole's favorite things about her. The second cohort was going to start in January and be oversubscribed and require him to figure out how to scale a curriculum he had built for 17 people. Eddie Trask was somewhere in the federal program with his wife and kids, rebuilding a life that would be different from the one he'd had, which was a complicated kind of grace, but a grace nonetheless. The contractor named Deschner was in federal prison, where he was going to remain for a long time. Harold Mears was cooperating with the ongoing federal investigation into Vantage Group's remaining operational infrastructure, which extended, it turned out, into 2 additional states and would take years to fully unwind. None of that was finished. None of it was entirely clean. The world did not resolve into clean endings. Cole had known that long before any of this, and nothing that happened in the past 14 months had changed it. What had changed was his understanding of what to do with that. He had spent 5 years building a wall between himself and the life he had left, and what he had learned slowly, reluctantly, and through circumstances he would not have chosen was that walls didn't make you safe. They made you still. And stillness, for a man like Cole Hawthorne, had been a kind of slow damage dressed up as survival. The highway had opened the door. Nora had walked through it bloody and focused and refusing to stay down. Lauren's case had given him back the truth he was owed. And Sadie, who asked good questions and got a minuses on salmon ecosystem reports, and ate 3 pancakes and wanted to visit an aquarium and had her mother's unbothered forward motion. Sadie had been telling him the whole time, without knowing she was telling him, that it was possible to be a person who had lost something irreplaceable and still show up for your breakfast. He had finally started listening. People talked, sometimes, about second chances, as though they were given as though they arrived complete, handed to you by circumstances or fortune or whatever organizing principle you happen to believe in. Cole didn't experience it that way. He experienced it as something you found in the decision you made in the moment of an ordinary evening when the rain was coming down and something appeared at the edge of the road, and you had a choice. You could keep driving, or you could stop. He had stopped. Everything after that, the fear and the loss and the work and the slowly reconstructed possibility, everything after that was what stopping meant. Was what it cost and what it gave back. He didn't think of it as courage, exactly. He thought of it as the thing you did when you had run out of good reasons to do otherwise. When the story you'd been telling yourself about why staying safe was the right call had finally worn thin enough to see through. On the highway, in the rain at 37 years old, Cole Hawthorne had seen a woman who needed help and he had gotten out of his truck. That was the whole of it. That was the thing that mattered. The rest was just the life that followed, imperfect, unfinished, and genuinely worth living.